got a few questions about ketones. What is your opinion on the Ketonics breath analyzer for acetone? Which is superior, the breath test or the blood test? Or the urine test?
I don't think anybody knows the answer to that. Rod has been travelling a bit more, so he may have a slightly different opinion. We're actually in the process of just starting a study to try and differentiate between the two, because the one obviously shows you the acetone that's active and being evaporated, and that's going to be dependent on factors that come before it, whereas a certain amount of your ketones may be travelling around in your system without actually being actively produced at that very moment in time. So there's some question as to whether the beta-hydroxybutyrate shows you whether you've got ketones versus actually being in ketosis at that particular moment in time. But quite honestly, I think there's probably an esoteric difference. I don't think it's really that important. If you want to spend $350 as your first purchase, you can buy a breath meter, and that's probably going to last you your entire keto lifestyle, and it does seem to be pretty accurate these days. It's sort of a little bit cheaper to buy the meter and the strips initially, and by the time you've done 50, 60 strips, you understand what it's all about, and you stop testing so often, and you then start testing every 2 weeks and once a month, and then maybe every 2 months or something like that. And so you've made this massive purchase of this item, which is probably accurate, but becomes less and less useful with time.
Yeah, my take, firstly, conflict of interest. Low Carb Down Under, our shop, we're friends with the Swedes who make it, and we've sold probably a couple of hundred of these over the last couple of years. We've got a lot of experience with them, and we've used them. My personal experience is they reasonably track the blood level, so I will do both at once, and I will see how they correlate. With the breath test, you don't have to prick your finger. It's very easy to do. I'd say that they're both good motivational devices. I think the people on the research side of things prefer the blood test. They think there's a little bit more consistency and reliability in that. But I don't think we know fully. They're relatively new devices. They certainly work for me, they motivate me, and we've had good feedback from the people who use them. But they're pricey.
What about endogenous ketones? Why do people take them? How do they work?
Exogenous.
Oh, sorry, what did I
Exogenous.
say? Yes, I meant exogenous.
Wow, this is... How much longer have we got? Okay, so if you're burning fat, you're producing ketones. Ketones are used for energy. If you drink ketones and put them into your blood, which will absorb them, you don't need to burn your own fat anymore because you're going to burn the ketones. So if you're trying to lose weight, drinking ketones is a very, very bad idea. That's point number one. Depending on what your goal is, as Dawn, our oncologist, she wants people to have levels of 3 or 4. If you're struggling to get high levels, because there is some evidence that the ketones actually protect you from oxidative stress as well, besides anything else, and help your brain during those therapies, and that's her words, not my words, by the way. She wants people at levels of 3 or 4. She will give them exogenous ketones if they can't get their ketone levels high enough. But you can not be in ketosis in terms of you can be fully glucose burning. You remember that diagram of the furnace that I had there? And take a whole lot of ketones, and your blood ketone testing will still be high because you've got ketones in your blood. That doesn't necessarily mean that that's a healthy lifestyle for you. The last thing is that we don't know what the effect of having ketones and insulin in our body for long periods of time are, because we've never done that before. Every time naturally we've had ketones in our blood, we've had low insulin at the same time, because because if you get insulin, you can't produce ketones. Now we're putting the body in a different state where you've got insulin and ketones at the same time. We don't know what's going to happen.
So from a slightly different perspective, we'll go back to 2012, the London Olympics. The UK cycling team absolutely blitzed the track. They were on something called a ketone ester. I think it was Oxford University that was synthesising it. Very expensive. I've got a nod there, maybe from Oxford. And that was certainly very beneficial to exercise performance. This provided a ready supply of energy without requiring the first step of the beta fatty acid oxidation. So from a performance perspective, exogenous ketones, be it through an ester, which is really not prohibitively expensive, ketone salts, which you can now get readily commercially, or what we call the medium chain triglycerides, which we have to be a wee bit careful about because coconut oil, which is called an MCT, which is supposedly going to boost your level of ketone, it's got a lot of 12 carbon chain, I think it's lauric, is it lauric? The fatty acid, which is actually, technically the nomenclature is a medium chain triglyceride, but it actually doesn't get metabolised as such. So if you are looking at boosting your ketones through that, you need to be looking at C8, caprylic is probably the best, or you can go to C10, which is a little bit less rapidly metabolised and turned into energy, but still not too bad. So exogenous ketones for performance are certainly very good, but as Daron said, if you increase them through diet, which is what I mean when I say exogenously, that exerts negative feedback on your body's need to break down fat to produce them, so you'll actually end up inhibiting your fat metabolism. So it's, your body's got a choice. Is it going to break your fat down, or is it going to break down the energy you're putting in your mouth? And it's always going to default to the energy you're putting in the mouth if that's not the right thing.
Well, we might have touched on this briefly in the earlier session, but ketosis, or the state of ketosis, can be precarious to stay in for many people. Some people have found that if they cheat just one day, they get thrown out of ketosis. How damaging is that, and do they lose the benefits of being in ketosis for the previous 3 or 4 days?
So, no, you don't lose the benefits. All that time that you're in ketosis, your insulin levels were low, your blood glucose levels were low, you were developing less AGEs, and you weren't getting towards all those other problems, glaucoma, disc disease, neurodegenerative diseases. So every minute that you're in ketosis is helpful for you. It's going to depend a lot on your metabolic health. So my mother, who has a few problems, if she has anything that cheats, she'll go out of ketosis for up to 2 weeks. That's how long it'll take her to get back into a proper fat burning state. If I cheat, it takes me about 12 hours. So it's going to be an individual thing, and that's where the ketone testing is so helpful, is because what you can do is you can work out with your own diet. Oh, I had 2 glasses of wine last night, this morning I woke up, I'm out of ketosis. All right, so next time I say, okay, I only had 1 glass of wine last night, I'm still in ketosis, well, I'm okay, I'm all right, I had this 1 glass of wine. But you don't have to be in ketosis all of the time. As long as you're in it some of the time, it's better than not being in it at all. Do I believe it would be better to be in it most of the time? Yes, I do. But if you're in it some of the time, that's better than nothing.
Yeah. And I make a comment? Steve Finney investigated this with bicycle cyclists, elite cyclists. He would have them low-carb ketogenic during the week, and at some stage on Saturday night, some of them said, oh, can't we have a bit of a night out? So after being ketogenic all week, beer and pizza on Saturday night. How long did it take them to get back into good ketosis? 2 to 3 days. Of course, that's more than your glass of wine. But they felt lousy the next day. So, when your body's burning a good fuel, why would you want to overturn that and really go backwards?
Well, that's a bit of an interesting story, and I've got a similar, not a totally dissimilar anecdote. So back in 2007, one of the AFL teams that gets around the place, it was a Melbourne-based one, they started trialling ketogenic diets. They thought it might be useful. And I spoke to a couple of the players who are involved in that, and they weren't sold on it. They'd grown up on carb loading, so they thought they would be super smart, smarter than the nutritional advice they'd had to be ketogenic. They would get the benefits of ketosis, and then when they were in the hotel the night before the game, they would order room service and order their pasta. So magnificent. They thought they would show them, so they were smarter than everybody. So needless to say, didn't work, negative results, and to best of my knowledge, that AFL club hasn't yet gone back to ketogenic diets, but I do know a couple of the other ones certainly play around the edges.
So just for clarity, what level of ketones should people aim for, or is it just too individual to make that comment?
I'd say people like Steve Finney say get to 1 at some stage of the day. At other times I've heard that to get to 0.5 is fine. Dawn Leman is telling her cancer treatment patients to get to 3 and 4 for their radiotherapy, for their chemotherapy. So there's a huge range. Most of the people on an ordinary average Australian diet, the ketone level will be 0 or 0.1. So I guess there's no absolute figures. It depends on why you're doing it. Depends how hard you want to do it. When you go fasting, by the way, your ketones really kick up. So don't think we have a definite answer, but that's my best one on Stephen's recommendation.
Could we get an idea of what each one of you think where you'd be at the moment as far as your ketosis level? Just out of curiosity.
Yeah, I've had afternoon tea. I've had lunch. I think mine would probably be at about 1. But if I hadn't eaten, or if I'd done before lunch with no breakfast, probably 1.0. Yeah. That's a rough guess, and it depends. What I did last night. There's a range of things. How good am I being about my diet at the moment? So yeah, that's a rough idea.
So mine varies wildly depending on how much sleep I've had. If I've had a night on call operating during the night, 2-3 hours sleep, my numbers are going to go down. If, stress because things are tough somewhere, numbers change a bit. If I exercise hard, my numbers change a bit. There's no badge of honour that says 5 is better than 0.6. I think all you need to understand is, are you burning fat? Have you got these ketones in your blood? I think we know what's too low. I think less than 0.3 and perhaps less than 0.5 is too low to get most of the benefits. But above that, my personal thought, I'm not sure there's anything better at being at 3 than what there is at 1. And if I've exercised hard, I may have been at sort of 1 before I exercised, might drop down to 0.4 or 0.5 after a hard batch of exercise because I've burned up all of the ketones that I had for energy. Does that mean I'm out of ketosis or that I'm doing badly? No. It means my body's using an appropriate fuel source when it should.
Can I ask a question on that?
Yeah.
You said you may have burnt up the ketones that are going around in your system, and yet I'm also getting the impression that to be in ketosis, using ketones as your fuel, is something that can power you maybe for a whole marathon, whereas the glucose burners hit the wall and they're probably feeding themselves with glucose the whole way through.
Could you just repeat the question? Well, just repeat the question so the rest of the audience can hear it.
So about sustaining the ketones in the blood for endurance exercise versus glycolysis, where you kind of hit the wall. And I think Professor Tim Noakes describes it as bonking when you are exercising and you run out of glucose. You can sustain yourself with ketones as a fuel source.
I'll let Paul's going to give you a complex answer. I'm going to give you a very simple answer. Right? Your glucose fuel tank is this big. Your fat fuel tank is this big. So you're going to run out of your glucose fuel a lot sooner than what you're going to run out of your fat fuel tank.
So the ketones can be constantly replenished. So what we're thinking of, when we did the finger prick blood test and you saw the beta-hydroxybutyrate, think of that as a ketone fuel tank. So at the same time you exercise, you can deplete that while stimulating fat burning, which will replenish that. So the level of beta-hydroxybutyrate that you have at that point in time doesn't necessarily reflect how much you're actually using. So if you have a look at some of the data, a fully keto-adapted athlete has the capacity to metabolise up to 2 grams of fat every minute. You know, that's quite a lot over the course of an hour. So, you know, 120 grams of fat metabolised in an hour. So there's a lot of replenishment of those ketone stores happening during that period of exercise. So there certainly is fluctuations in your beta-hydroxybutyrate stores, and I absolutely concur with what Doron said about, you know, we don't necessarily know that 0.7 is any better or worse than 1.4. What it does prove is two things: that your blood glucose level is low because you only go down the ketone pathway when your body says, hey, I need glucose, so it starts to make its own glucose. So that's why there's no obligate need for carbohydrates, by the way, because if your body needs glucose, it'll make it. And in making it, it depletes that oxaloacetate, which is essential to drive the ketone pathway. And the other thing, as well as proving that you've got low blood sugars, it's proving that you've got the capacity to metabolise fat. So does having a higher level or lower level demonstrate these more or less strongly? I'm not convinced. I don't, as Dylan said, we don't fully understand the science. I've had a look at the literature and there's a lot of toing and froing, but I still think that there's some exciting research to come.
Do you want to talk about your ketone level? Did you measure it today?
North of 1. I haven't measured it.
What about Taryn?
So my ketone levels, as Doron was saying before, I find fluctuate very much depending on my training. And if I'm doing a high intensity training session, they will often drop straight afterwards, which I found interesting and had a chat to Paul Doron about that. But I tend to hover maybe around 0.5. But I actually will go sometimes from 0.3 to 0.7. I very rarely get into the really high levels. I don't eat dairy and I don't eat red meat for ethical reasons, not because I believe it's my animal thing. I feed it to my family and all of that. So I think that probably has a lot to do with it. I definitely follow a full ketogenic diet, but I will fluctuate, and I will fluctuate depending on my training levels.
Okay.